And the next day, when she awoke, the king called for the healing women of the kingdom to come. And they came, and they cared for the Handless Maiden. And they washed her and cleaned her and cared for her and remedied the deprivations of her long wandering through the forest. And then the king came and sat beside her bed and listened to her story. And she asked him about his life, and he told her his story as well. And then he went to the throne room, and he summoned the royal craftsmen, and he commanded them to make hands for the Handless Maiden. And they went to their workshop, and they made beautiful hands out of silver, beautiful, finely detailed hands that were all silver and gleamed and glistened in any light. And the king brought these hands to the Handless Maiden, and she put them on the stumps of her arms, strapped them on, and she looked down at them, and she was pleased. And she spent a long time in this palace, and it was a beautiful time for her and for the king. They got to know each other very well, and after a while they fell in love. So there was a wedding. There was a wedding in the palace garden, amid the pear trees. And the beautiful words were said, binding a man and a woman together like two threads in a tapestry, a glorious tapestry that neither of them could have imagined before they met. And there was a feast afterwards, and there was dancing. And the Handless Maiden with her silver hands, she danced with the king. And the light of the candles shone on those silver hands and sparkled on the walls. And at night they retired to the royal bedroom. So they knew many happy days which became weeks and became months. These were good times for the woman of the silver hands and the king. They lived together there in that palace in happiness. But as time went on, messages began arriving from far off, dark messages, and the king was often called away to emergency meetings with his counselors and his wise men and his generals. And at night the craftsmen who had made the silver hands, they were busy making other things, making spears and shields and swords for an army. And then a day came when war was declared. And the king told the woman with silver hands, "My dear, there is a war. I must fight this war. I must defend this kingdom." And the army was gathered, and finally the day came when they would set out. And in the field before the castle there were horses and soldiers, there were flags, there were generals and sergeants, there were swords and spears sparkling in the sun. But before they left, the king went into the throne room, and he went to his wife, and he said, "My dear, I will miss you very much, but I will be back." And she said, "My husband, you should know I am expecting a child." And he looked at her deeply and seriously, and he said, "My dear, I will fight this war, and I will win this war, and I will return very soon to be with you and with our dear child. Have no fear, I love you very much." And they kissed goodbye, and then he left the throne room and walked out and got on his horse, and he gave an order, and the army set out. And the woman with silver hands watched from the palace gate, and for a while the dust of walking soldiers and of horses filled the air above the forest, and then that dust drifted down onto the leaves and was still. And the woman with silver hands walked back into the throne room, and there was the king's mother, the queen mother, in a lavender dress, and she embraced her daughter-in-law, and then the two of them went off to have dinner in the royal banquet hall. Well, time passed, and the king was away, but the woman with silver hands became great with child. And some months later, she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. So there was much happiness and joy in that palace. And the queen mother, in her lavender dress, she went to her room and sat down at her writing table, and she wrote a letter to her son, describing how things had gone and saying that now he was the father of a beautiful baby boy. And she gave this letter to a messenger who got on a horse and galloped away across the countryside, across the kingdom, to the battle. But on the way, he stopped at a stream that had a tree beside it. And he tied his horse to that tree, and he sat down beside that stream to rest. And before long, he fell asleep. And then out from behind the tree there came someone, a gray man. And he walked towards the sleeping messenger. And he reached down, and he took the letter written by the Queen Mother out of his pocket. And the gray man looked at the words of this letter, and he waved his hand over those words, and the letters in those words began to flow and change and dance and snarl themselves up in the most strange way. And when he was done waving his hand, those words were not the same as they had been before. And he took that letter and tucked it back in the pocket of the uniform of the messenger. And then the gray man walked behind the tree and became a puff of smoke drifting away on the breeze. Well, that messenger awoke. He got on his horse and he set out for the battlefield. And he came there, and there was a large, beautiful green tent, and the king was inside. And he knelt before the king, and he handed him that letter. And the letter said, "My son, I bring hard news. Your wife, the queen, well, she has given birth to a monster, a boy that is half human and half dog. Tell me what I should do." And the king stood up and paced around that tent for a while. And then he went to his writing table, and he sat down and he wrote a message. And he gave it to the messenger. And the messenger got on his horse, and off he went. And he brought that letter to the Queen Mother. And she opened that letter, and the words it said were these: "My dear mother, I have always known that my wife was an evil spirit, and not a woman of this earth after all. She is evil, so I command you to kill her and to kill the child. Do this immediately." The Queen Mother gasped and looked into the distance. Her son? Had he written these words? She was not so sure. She pondered this for a while, and then she wrote another letter, saying, "Are you sure? Are you certain? Is this really what you want me to do?" And again the messenger took this to the king. And again the king wrote back, but as before the gray man came in between, and he changed the words of those letters. So finally, one day, when the Queen Mother was sitting in her lavender dress in her royal room, the messenger came to her and handed her a letter. And she read the letter, and it said, "Yes, I want my wife and the child to be killed immediately, and save her tongue and the eyes of my child, so I have proof that this has been done, for I trust no one." And now the Queen Mother was shocked. She was scared, but she was also suspicious. She went to a window of her room. She looked out. She could see the garden, down there amid the pear trees. The woman with silver hands was there with her baby boy. They were playing in the grass. And the Queen Mother felt that letter in her hands, like it was hot and dangerous. And she looked down at them there, laughing and playing in the grass. And then she walked down the stairs and out into the garden, and she went and she told the woman with silver hands everything. And she showed her the letter. And the woman with silver hands hid her face in those silver hands. And she wept. But the Queen Mother said, "This is not my son. This is his writing, but I think something horrible has happened. Someone besides your husband has it in for you. Someone wants to destroy you." And the woman with silver hands looked up and she said, "Yes, it is true. When I was a girl, my father promised me to a magician in the forest, and that promise was never kept. He is still angry. He seeks to destroy me." She looked at her child. "I will bring ruin on this whole kingdom unless I depart. I must go. I must wander the world as a beggar. I must travel the dark places of this world, otherwise that ruin will come here, and the gray man will destroy this kingdom." And she stood up, and she said, "Bind my child to my breast, and I will go." The Queen Mother tried to talk her out of this, but she could not be talked out of it. So they bound the baby boy to her chest. And the woman with silver hands walked up into the castle and through the throne room. And then, as the sun began to go down, she walked down the steps and across the field and into the forest. And the Queen Mother watched her go from the doorway, and she wept. And the woman with silver hands, she wandered for a long time. Once again, she ate ferns. She ate what only she could find, old leaves, certain berries she found on branches. And often her baby boy wept and cried out because of hunger. But there was little for him to eat. She was not sure where she was going. She knew only she was wandering. She was taking a pathless path once again. And then late one day, very thirsty, she stumbled through a forest, and she heard trickling water up ahead. And she looked, and she saw a beautiful clear blue pool, with a stream trickling away from it. And there was an old woman dressed in white standing at the edge of this pool, and behind her was a house made of wood, a house built in a spiral, in among the boulders there in that place. And the woman in white said, "Welcome. I have been expecting you." And she guided the woman with silver hands and her child into that spiraling wooden house beside the pool. And they walked down a hallway, and they came to a beautiful bedroom. And there was a soft, warm bed there. And she lay down, and she slept. And she slept a deep sleep, and she had many dreams. And in the morning the sun came up, and the birds of this world began to sing. And the woman with silver hands, she awoke before her child. He was nestled up against her in the soft bed. And she looked at him as the morning light came through the windows, and then she reached out and she brushed his hair away from his face. And as she did that, she stopped, and she realized what she had done, and she looked at her hand, and she saw that it was a real hand. And her other arm also had a real hand on it. Her hands were healed. She gave a gasp of excitement. She squirmed out of bed and stood in the room, looking at her own hands, flexing them, moving the fingers in the morning light. She gave a yelp of joy, and then her baby boy awoke, and she reached out and picked him up and held him close to her breast. And that morning the old woman came to her, and also a middle-aged woman, and also a young woman. All three of them had long, dark hair like the darkness between stars, and they had musical voices, and when they spoke to her it almost seemed as if they sang. And she was given delicious food that day, and she ate until she was satisfied, and soon her baby boy was satisfied as well. And some say that soon after that she left her child in the care of the three women, and went off and climbed a tree. And some say that she took an axe, and she cut wood to keep that whole house warm through the long winter. And some say that she went far off into a secret glade in that forest, and there she danced for a long time, springing and leaping in circles, flexing and twisting her hands in the beautiful light of that forest. So she stayed there, in that spiraling wooden house beside the pool, for a long time. Now soon after she had left the kingdom, many things had happened. After a while a messenger came to that castle, and he brought a message to the Queen Mother. And the message was, "The war is finished. I have been victorious. Mother, I will be home soon." And after a while dust could be seen rising from the trees far off. And then came the sound of marching feet and of horses. And then into the field came the entire army, with the king at the head of it on a white horse. And the soldiers were all there, clattering and banging around. They were dirty, they were wounded, there were fewer of them than there had been before. And their metal did not shine in the sun as it had on the day when they set out. But they had been victorious. And the king went to the steps of the castle, and he ran inside into the throne room. There were 2 servants there, with a bowl of water and some towels, so that he could wash the dust from his journey from his face. But he walked right past them, and went to his mother. And he said, "Mother, where is my dear wife? Where is my darling child?" And she said, "Where is your wife? Where is your child? They have been killed, just as you ordered, my son." And he looked at her, and he said, "They've been killed?" And she said, "Yes, just as you ordered." And she pulled out a jar, and in that jar there was a tongue of a deer, in fact, and 2 eyes also of a deer. And she said, "Here is the proof. I have killed them just as you ordered." And the king sank to his knees, and he said, "They are no more." And he began to weep. And his mother saw in that moment that his sorrow was true. And she knew then that the letters had been false and were not written by his hands. And she reached out and she embraced him, and she said, my son, no, no. That's what the letters told me to do, but I did not do it. Have no fear. They are not here. They set out wandering into the forest." And she told him the whole story. And then he stood up, and he took his royal cloak from his shoulders, and he put it down on the ground. And then he turned, and he looked across the throne room, and past his army and into the forest beyond. And he said, "She is wandering, and so I will wander as well. I will beg, I will creep across this earth, I will walk as far as the sky is blue, until I find them. Mother, care for this kingdom in my absence." And then he took the royal rings of power from his fingers, and he threw them to the ground. A general was just coming up the steps. He heard the sound. All the servants did. They clattered across the floor. All he kept was the wedding ring on his finger. And he walked across the throne room and down the steps. And then he walked through his army, his surprised army. They parted ways to make room for him. These bedraggled men who had fought so hard for the kingdom, they saw their king, with no crown on his head, with no royal cloak, with no rings of power on his fingers. He walked through the army and towards the forest. And he went where there was no path, and he disappeared. Well, that king wandered for a long time. And he lived off what he could find, and he became dirty and thin and ragged, and his hair became wild as well. He begged here, he begged there. He spoke to everyone he met, asking them if they had seen a woman with silver hands and a small child, but no one had seen them. He wandered through strange villages, strange towns, the dark places where hardly anyone ever goes. And one night he couldn't sleep, and he just went stumbling through this forest, through swamps and old bushes, over downed trees. And finally he heard the sound of trickling water. And he walked towards it, and he saw, in the light of the stars, he saw a pool of clear water, with a spring flowing out of it. And there was an old woman dressed in white standing beside that pool. And she said, "Welcome. I have been expecting you." And behind her there was a wooden house built in an amazing spiral shape. And she guided him to that house, and she opened the door and led him inside. And she took him to a room where there was a fireplace, and a fire crackling in that fireplace. It was a warm room, and there was a wooden bench there along the wall. And she said, "My dear king, sleep here and be well." And he lay down to sleep on that wooden bench. But he had arrived in the early hours of the morning. The blue light of the dawn was already soaking into the eastern sky. So he took a handkerchief from his pocket, and he spread it over his eyes to keep out the light. And the old woman in white went away, and the king slept. But after a while the world awoke, the birds began to sing. And the boy who lived in that spiraling house, he was awake before his mother, and he got up to play. And he went into the room with a fireplace in it, and he saw the wild man on the wooden bench, covered in hair and mud, dirt, smelling of earth and of stones and of sticks. And he noticed the handkerchief on the man's face, and how when the man snored, the handkerchief went up and then went down, went up and then went down with his breath. And then, as the small boy watched, the handkerchief lifted up and fell to the floor. So, laughing, the small boy picked up the handkerchief and spread it on the wild man's eyes once again. The king, lying on the bench, he awoke, but he knew there was a boy there, and he continued to play the game. He breathed out, and he sent that handkerchief down to the floor. And this little boy, about 7 years old, he picked it up and put it back on the king's face. They played this game back and forth, blowing the handkerchief off and back on again, off and back on again. And then the old woman in white came into the room, and she said, "My dear child, let your father sleep." "My father?" he said. "I have no father." "Yes, my child, you do have a father. And after long, long searching, he has found you and your mother at last." And the boy looked with astonishment at the wild man there on the bench, and then he turned and ran into the bedroom. And the woman in white went away, and the king took the handkerchief from his face, and he sat up and he put his feet on the floor. And then into the room came the boy, tugging his mother by her hand. And he said, "Mother, mother, look who's here." And she looked at the dirty, muddy king, and he looked at her. And she looked through the grime and the dirt, and she recognized who he was. And she said, "My husband?" And he looked at her. "My dear wife, but your hands." And she held her hands up, and she said, "My hands have been healed by the magic and the kindness of this place." And the two of them reached for each other, and they embraced there beside the fire. And their boy embraced them both as well. And they cried tears of joy, and there was much sweetness there in that moment. Well, all three of them stayed in that spiraling house for a while longer. And the three women helped them all and nursed the king, who was very thin and bedraggled from his long wandering. They helped him back into health. So they spent a delightful time in that spiraling house beside the pool there. And then the day came when it seemed right to return to the palace. So they prepared their things, and all three of them got on a white horse. They got on it right there beside the pool. And the three women came out of the spiraling house, the old woman, the middle-aged woman, and the young woman. And they looked at them. And then the young woman said, "Wait one moment," and she dashed off into the spiraling wooden house. And a moment later she came back with something wrapped in cloth. And she went to the horse, she went to the queen there, and she handed her the cloth. And the queen, with silver hands, looked inside that bundle of cloth and saw what was there. And then she smiled and looked at the young woman, and she said, "Thank you." And the young woman went away. And the king spurred the horse on, and they all said goodbye, and then they went off into the forest. And they traveled for a good long ways on the back of that white horse. And finally they returned to the palace. And they got off that horse, and they walked into the throne room, and they were welcomed by the Queen Mother in her lavender dress. And she cried tears of joy to see them all once again. And they rested, and when they were well rested, there was, of course, a feast, a great celebration. The queen was back, and she had her hands, and the king was back, and their dear son, this 7-year-old boy, was there as well. So there was a grand feast in that castle, in the banquet hall. Candles were all lit, and musicians played. And they sang, and they told stories for a long time in that beautiful banquet hall. And then they all prepared to dance. But as they were getting ready to do that, the queen said to her husband, "My dear husband, I have to do one thing. I will be right back." And she went away from that banquet hall and down into the royal bedroom. And in a drawer in that bedroom she found the bundle given to her by the young woman at the spiraling house beside the pool. And then she went down the stairs of the castle and into the garden filled with pear trees shining in the moonlight. And she took a shovel from the side of the gardener's hut, and she dug a small hole. And she opened the bundle that she'd taken from the royal bedroom, the bundle given to her by the young woman at the spiraling house. And inside that bundle were her 2 silver hands. And she looked at them for a moment, and then she put them down in the hole she had dug in the earth. And she stood there for a moment looking. She saw the moonlight reflected, gleaming in those silver hands. She could hear the music. She could look up and see the candlelight glowing in the windows of the royal banquet hall. She could see the moon on the pears and the stars in the sky. She looked down at those silver hands one last time. And then she took the shovel, and she shoveled dirt on top of those hands, and then patted the dirt down. And she returned the shovel to the wall of the gardener's shed. And she went up the stairs to that banquet hall. And she took the king's hands in her own hands, and she led him to the dance floor. And the 2 of them danced happily in the center of that dance floor for a long time. And perhaps in some beautiful room of this world, they are dancing still. Hello, people. This is Jay Leeming on WRFI, Watkins Glen, Ithaca, coming to you. We're discussing the Handless Maiden once again, and my great and good friend Elaine Stanton is here. Welcome to the show, Elaine.
Hey, good to be here in mythic time.
In mythic time, yes. Mythic time is every time. It is constant. It is flowing through us. Yes, mythic time. Awesome. So we're going to investigate, not investigate. Well, yeah, we'll investigate, but we'll feel. We will explore part 2 of the Handless Maiden, Grimm's fairy tale. So let's hit it. Yeah, very interesting things happen in the second half of this story. Elaine, do you have any
And Jay,
thoughts?
if I can stop you just to back up and sort of lay the ground, I
Mhm.
after we talked last time, I really was struck that we really hadn't dwelt on the loss of in the beginning of the fairy tale. So I think just as a backup, before we lead into the second half, this experience of having your hands chopped off,
Mhm.
or being taken unwillingly, which would have been a kind of death as well.
Mhm.
We have all experienced loss in our lives. And I just wanted to go back to that stunning and terrible image of the hands being cut off,
Mhm.
and think about, people who flee their homes at 4 a.m. and they're burned to the ground. We come
Mhm.
into work and we're fired.
Mhm.
I mean, you walk back home and suddenly your partner of 30 years says, I want a divorce.
Mhm.
There's this great loss that we can all experience, and it so speaks of a certain kind of loss in this fairy tale where
Mhm.
something is just cut off,
Mhm.
so I think that's a good place to begin just as we enter into the second half.
Thank you. Yes. And it's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, it's a loss which is it's done to her. It's not
Yes.
really, I mean, people can try something and fail and be wounded, for example. But here it's something very specifically, she is subject to this violence. It is done to
Right.
her. Yeah.
Yes, you get a cancer diagnosis. You didn't ask cancer into your life, but your health and your old way is gone. You will
Yeah.
never be the same again.
Mm.
And I think, we don't want to downplay how courageous this woman is. She refuses to go, she
Hmm.
refuses to just give up. And as we enter this second half, I mean, she had great courage to say, I'm not going to stay where I have been.
Hmm.
If she is crippled, she has no way to survive, but she is not going to stay there. And she has
Yeah.
tremendous courage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, so often our urge, my urge, when I'm hurting in some way, is to curl up and contract. And
Yeah.
sometimes that means going to a home, a place that feels like home. Of course, here the home is where the assault happened, where
Yes.
um, but she goes out into the world, which is
She doesn't
scary.
stay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Nor does she allow herself to become something that she is not.
Hmm.
I mean, in some ways, she seems very passive. She has her hands cut off, but I don't think we want to ignore the stubbornness and the courage that she had to remain true to herself during this time. You know,
Yes, yes. She's far from a passive character in
right?
general. Um,
Yes,
yeah. Also, it's the hands. We talked about this a little bit last time, but the
yeah.
hands in particular is the wound. Her ability to do and accomplish, you would think, in the world. Any thoughts about that? More about the hands in
Well,
particular?
I, the old saying, my hands were tied.
Oh, yeah.
Which hers are tied behind, I mean, her stumps are tied behind her back, even. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that's one image in one of the fairy tales.
Mm.
Um, Again, I think there's a certain kind of, um, what do I want to say, action that this woman and this part of ourselves exhibits when we go through great loss and we set out on a journey to something new.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't just grab something new. You can't just go through a divorce and pretend like it never happened and get married immediately. That doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really work.
Yeah.
And um, and I think the story, as it goes on, talks about what will really work as we try and heal ourselves or come into our true selves.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I do think that there's times when we have gone through loss and we are wandering, we're wounded, we're in grief,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we're stumbling around, and I think that really relates to that image of not having any hands and not knowing where to go other than where we were is gone, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she kind of flings herself out into the world without a plan, without.
Right. But she does trust in a greater sense of the world. That is so. I was thinking of the fairy tale. Often there isn't a devil image as there is in this one. It's
Mm-hmm.
an evil stepmother, like it would have been her
Yeah.
stepmother that did all of this. But
Mm-hmm.
here we have a whole entity that is evil in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And she really has chosen to not go that way. And
Mm.
so that, in some fairy tales, she has an angel that walks with her.
Mm-hmm.
She is not alone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we can't ignore in this fairy tale that there is a connection to something greater as she is wandering and,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense, being guided.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I'll just reiterate too, at least for me, like the devil is the devil if that works for you, but he's just an evil force, right? Which doesn't
Yes.
necessarily need to be the Christian devil.
No.
And probably behind him stands another power, depending on the culture you're telling the story in or you're from,
Right.
because it can be a little cartoon-like sometimes, if for certain people.
Well,
Yeah.
and in some way, just, psychologically, that force is when you're really not true to yourself, if you follow that energy, shall we say.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be true to yourself? I don't know. That's why we read fairy tales.
Right, right. That's the task, yeah. But the devil's not it, he's not
No.
the one. No. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's really resonant, that devil guy. Oof. Thank you for bringing us to that spot. That's a crucial spot in the whole thing. If it's acupuncture, that's where they put the needle in, and you're like, oh, that's the spot.
Yes.
So she wanders off. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
should we move on? We
Yeah.
heard she wanders off, ends up with this earthly king who cares for her, and
Yes.
that's where we're beginning more or less today with this
Yeah.
half of the story. It strikes me the question that comes up is why isn't the story over? Because clearly it's not, and it doesn't. I guess it doesn't feel like it's over to me, but there's some sort of mental part of me which is like, well, she's in a castle. There's this nice guy who's taken care of her, and why couldn't it be done? But her healing is not over. Um,
No.
she's got to do more. Do you have thoughts about this?
Well, I think he gives her silver hands,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, and she's found a place that she feels secure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we're talking about redemption here in a sense. She's under a curse from the devil.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, to redeem herself, to go all the way, she has to get her real hands back again. So,
Mm-hmm.
she's being in the world where she's partly true to herself. I would say what it brings up for me is she's okay in herself, but her connection to the world isn't really there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so maybe she's a tremendous poet that is spending her time as a waitress
Uh,
and not writing any poetry. That would be an example to me of somebody who's getting by and she has these visions of
mm-hmm.
writing poetry, but she's not really gone that route, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, or somebody who, say, really wants to have children
Mm-hmm.
and is going through life and is fine, but she has not gone that next step into
Mm-hmm.
becoming a mother. I don't know, it could be so many things. It's just a deeper life is missing
Mm-hmm.
with the silver hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have this second, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we have this second voyage out into the world. Like you pointed out, the first one, she refuses to stay home, even though her parents have all this magical money and are like, well, you can live here forever. It's quite clear.
Right.
But she leaves that. She's not having that. And then ends up at this castle. And then after all the business with the letter and stuff, she sets out again into the world. So
Right.
so what you say rings a bell for me in that, her
Well,
answers. Yeah.
it's an interesting twist in this particular fairy tale. Often, like I said, there could be an evil stepmother here in the castle
Yeah.
who sends the note to the king who has gone off to fight war.
Hmm.
He's connected to the world. um, but in this case, it again is the devil that causes this problem. He's
Hmm.
still trying to get this woman's soul, shall we
Hmm.
say,
Yeah.
meaning, as we said, she's not, she's in kind of a limbo right now. I
Hmm.
think we could call it a limbo, where she's surviving, but she is not furthering her growth
Hmm.
towards her true self, if we want to be like that.
True self. Yes. Yes.
I
Yes.
know it's kind of a interesting world, but I do think that we all, as we've all been given this gift of life here in this world, and we need to connect to our inner selves, and we need to connect to the outer world. And
Mm.
some of us are born with a better connection out and not in, and so I think here we have somebody that's found some peace and meaning, but just not connected to the world, shall we say.
Yeah.
Something's not quite right
Hmm.
here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know if we need to go there, but I mean, just in my own life, I can
Yeah,
totally, yeah, I mean, I can totally, living when I was in my 20s, writing songs in my apartment in Minneapolis and not, not owning a good guitar amplifier or a car, but wanting to start a band.
right.
And I'm like, when if you write a good song, that's all you need, people. That's all you need. But really, well, how are you going to go anywhere and actually play? And maybe you should have a better guitar amplifier that more than two people can hear. And so for me, I was in a state where the enthusiasm, the love of the art was there, but the connection to the world was a little iffy.
Right. That practical stuff. Yes.
Yes, yes, practical side.
Yeah.
So she is in this castle. She's cared for. Her body's cared for. She's in this good relationship, we assume. And but then things go bad with the
Right.
letters and everything.
And I got to say, like I said, here we have even a good mother in the castle.
Hmm.
And it's sometimes like no matter what we do, stuff goes wrong. Uh,
Hmm.
you'd think she'd been through enough,
Yeah. Hmm.
but no, these letters, she gives birth and the letters are interrupted and intercepted. And
Hmm.
once again, this bad stuff comes back into her life. I even thought one analogy is, somebody that say joins AA and they
Hmm.
really do all this work and so forth, and they're doing so good, and for various reasons fall off the wagon.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
it's just, anyways, we all, or you have a cancer diagnosis, you go through remission, it returns,
Yeah. Hmm.
um, you live in California, your house burnt down, there's another fire and it's
Hmm.
coming your way.
Hmm.
These are all things that really do happen, and they're
Hmm.
certainly happening in this fairy tale.
Yeah. Yeah. The messenger falls asleep. That's a
Yes.
cool kind of detail too, that some part
Yeah.
of ourselves, which was responsible for carrying the true message,
Right.
falls asleep, you know,
Yeah.
in much thinks it's all okay, actually. Maybe he's heard this story before too as well. And he's like, well, she's in the castle. She's got some hands, which are okay.
Yeah.
I can sleep now. And of course, that's the moment the devil seizes upon
Yes.
to mix things up.
Right.
Yeah. So then it's out into the world again, throwing
Yes.
herself. And it's sort of like, did you mention faith? I don't know if you did. Faith in the world's capacity to bring something unexpected and to heal her. Or maybe she's just desperate. I don't know. But out she goes into the world, which is very courageous. This time with a baby on her back.
Yes.
Um,
So, yes, her life has gone forward, but once again, she is an outcast with no ability to actually help herself directly. You know,
mhm,
this is a certain kind of heroic tale. It's not going out and slaying the dragon. This is a different thing where one puts oneself out, not knowing where to go or how to care for oneself.
mhm.
But it is a heroic tale,
Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine. I mean, I myself have a terrible sense of direction
Hmm.
and at the same time, quite a sense of adventure. I have been lost many times. And I mean, I was thinking about this with the story. I have been literally in darkness, wandering around at the edge of a national forest, trying to find my way down to the road. And if I miss that, I'm gone all night, into the national forest.
Right.
And I heard some dogs barking, and that was my light,
Mm.
my guide.
Mhm.
And then I made it down to a house and found the road and actually survived.
Well,
But that's just one of many times. But I think we can all think about again wandering, and this time with even a greater burden of responsibility.
hmm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a good, it's a very difficult place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. The child too. I mean, gosh. I mean, that's, the child who's needs to be fed and cared for, and it's instead on this horrible for the child journey with mom into the unknown.
Right.
That's painful
And,
to me.
if we want to be really symbolic, we can say, something new in our lives has
Hmm.
manifested during, um, as we're growing, and
Hmm.
it is very helpless and childlike.
Hmm.
And we're not always sure how to nurture something new in our lives.
Hmm.
As you said with your music, it is a combination of many things
Hmm.
to get art out into the world, shall we say?
Hmm.
Or maybe you have this idea for an amazing job that's going to help others, and so forth, and it's like a new baby, and here you're trying to do all your other stuff as well, but how do you get this new part out into the world? It's
Hmm.
not easy, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a flinging of herself out into. I mean, the gesture I think of is like kind of arms wide up, or like I don't know, dropping
Uh-huh.
herself into water somehow or something. It's kind of like
Right.
without any knowledge of what may come. She just knows she has to leave that castle and
Right.
head out.
And try to leave that curse, or this thing that keeps following her and messing up her life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so once again, she's going out into the world on a quest to somehow separate herself out from this force that keeps coming back into her life
Mm-hmm.
at key moments. Here she is, a new mother, and
Mm-hmm.
has a baby and is going on with her life, and wham,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's all taken from her, not her child, but the security. you know
Mm-hmm.
she does have, at least in the fairy tales that I've read, she has a guide once again,
Mm-hmm.
which is her faith in nature, and that there is, I think you can even just say there's a faith that there is some way she can find to be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
she's not given up. I just fall back on the tremendous courage of this figure.
Mm-hmm.
She's
Mm-hmm.
just going to keep going,
Mm-hmm.
as best she can.
Yeah.
Um,
Because this
yeah.
castle could be another stopping place. I mean, it has been a stopping place, but it could be
Yes.
she could remain and put up with the silver hands and with
Yes.
whatever happens with the king and the child, But she doesn't accept that stopping place as a permanent, solution, and she goes forward towards something
Right.
else. Yeah. Mm. And then, well, I don't know. Do we have to be chronological about this? Well, she gets to a house. She wanders, and we could talk about the wandering. We have a little already. Lost in the forest. Who has not been lost in a forest? I suppose.
Yeah.
Can go on for years, years, and
Yes.
then somehow you get grace. Somehow you get a gift just for you. This house that she arrives at, and there she's cared for.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
I think we want to just take a moment to contrast this hut compared to the castle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She's had three dwellings places. She's had the miller's home,
Mm-hmm.
she's had this castle,
Mm-hmm.
and then the hut.
Mm-hmm.
And if we even go back, I think we touched on this with the beginning with the miller, her father. The miller was considered removed from nature. He made his living off of farmers who were connected to the natural world. Um, and there's something about that, a lack of connection to nature, that she left. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and then even in the castle, there still is not a connection to nature. And if we want to just look very simply at these three dwelling places, where she ends up is in the middle of a forest, really in the natural world. And there's
Mm-hmm.
something about that I think we all can look at.
Mhm.
We talk about global warming, and we're all concerned with it, and we do our part in our own separate ways. But one thing that I think a lot of people don't have a connection to is actual nature.
Mhm.
We're,
Mhm.
um, those of us that can go to Yosemite or various places
Mhm.
really can have that restored.
Mm.
But for many people living in the city, that global warming is this real thing, but actually dealing with bears and skunks
Mhm.
and mice eating all your food and getting lost on the mountain and so forth, these aren't very real anymore. But
Mhm.
in anyways, in this story, she ends up in a very place connected to what is natural.
Mhm.
And I think you can also just look at that as something that she really needed to have to
Mhm.
heal.
Mhm.
And she does heal in this way.
Mm.
Um, and we all can ask ourselves, what would that mean for me? What would being in that hut and being back to what is natural, what would that mean,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
feel like or be?
Yeah.
Uh,
It's such an education just to be around things that grow and just to see them. I mean, I'm sure if I was a serious gardener or a farmer, that would educate me as well. But I'm talking just on the simple level of just being surrounded by things which just, I don't know, poetically and in kind of dream language, they just come out of the dark and they flourish and they
yes.
often, depending on what you're looking at, they seem quite happy to be doing that, you know? I mean,
Mhm.
the flower or even the grasses, you know, they're very expressive and it's just like, yes, I'm this kind of thunderous power just coming out of the soil and being myself. Um,
Yes.
I think I loved that as a teenager, just going to the woods because everything seemed to be being itself there in a way that in geometry class in seventh grade things were not for me anyway.
Yeah.
Perhaps for other people, yes, but it seemed like things were they were in competition, they were in dance, in wrestling with each other, but nevertheless things were flourishing in their own way. And that's where she ends up, and that's where the healing comes. Only then, you know.
Right.
Um, it strikes me too. I don't want to make it too elegant or too abstract, but the first building, things are ground up, as you pointed out,
Oh yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
in the second one, things are numbered and cherished,
Yes.
but they aren't grown necessarily. And then in the
Mm-hmm.
last building, the last place, things are actually grown. You know, that power is actually there. The power that was at the root of the that makes the counting and the grinding up possible. You know, at all.
Yes.
Um, so it's just very beautiful. Sometimes these fairy tales are just like little patterns in the sand, which are so symmetrical and lovely, like a dance. It's really great, you know.
Right.
Um,
So we could even say that for her, a deeper healing occurs when she is connected to that natural world that was not even part of her family. You
mm-hmm,
know, she has to go further than that to be healed. And you can just think in your own life, when have you gone to a place that's further than, say, your family, your history, and all that, into this world that is much greater than
mm-hmm,
where you came from, you
mm-hmm,
know?
mm-hmm,
And so she definitely gets there. And let's not forget, she's there 7 years, you know?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I That's not an overnight connection.
Yeah.
She wasn't passing through. She
Mm-hmm,
was dwelling there
mm-hmm,
in this simple place of immediate um, survival and love, shall we say.
mm-hmm,
I think of Mary Oliver's poems, for one
mm-hmm,
thing, as a beautiful connection to nature.
mm-hmm,
Um, and we can all think in ourselves, when has that occurred? And it doesn't have to be literally in a hut in the forest, of
mm.
course,
Yeah.
um, but it needs to be something that is very basic and not involved, I think, with everyday demands, shall we
Mm-hmm.
say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a really beautiful place that she finds. And I will say, Jay, in some of the fairy tales, I've seen that she goes to get a drink in the well, and there is an angel there, and her baby falls from her back. Sometimes she's trying to feed the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it falls into the well, and she has to reach for it with her stumps. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a voice that says, reach. And she says, I can't. And anyways, it is through this great love that she regains her hands.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the other fairy tale I read, they just slowly grew back.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different um, but I think even in the slowly growing back, she is loving this child that she
Mm-hmm.
has and
Mm-hmm.
caring for it. And I mean, you could really say, in a way, through love, her hands have grown back.
Mm. So love for the child is key in the regeneration of her hands, you're thinking.
Yes, in the stories I've read,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think that child represents this, as we said, coming full circle from being separated from nature
Mm-hmm.
in a world um, like even back then, like the miller,
Mm-hmm.
who chooses greed and security rather than connection to nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so this child represents and is the future for her,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
So
Just to avoid people getting confused, I should just mention that as you're saying, yeah, in the Grimm's version, there's an angel at the house. In my version, I chose to have the three aspects of the goddess, a young woman,
oh, okay,
an
great.
angel,
Yes, that's right.
and
Yeah.
a grandmother, an elder. But there's lots of ways to go at this story, and of course, there's hundreds of versions from around the world. Um, I read one from Africa, and I forget who it was in the hut exactly. It might have just been a spirit. I think they used that word, um,
Yes.
but so anyway, I didn't want people getting lost, so we're all on the same page.
Oh, yes.
But
In many fairy tales, the individual has to wander to these and find these huts with these grandmothers in them, and they
hmm
give them gifts. And I
yeah,
think this is along that line. They're
hmm
always rather out of the way and connected to nature,
yeah,
And so
hmm
and unlike a lot of those tales where you get something and you have to go on because you are, on this big journey, she finds herself there and
yeah,
stays with the grandmother.
yeah.
Yes.
Have you felt that connection to nature? Would you say?
Uh, I certainly, as I said, I've wandered so much, because
hmm
I've gotten literally lost in these huge forests.
hmm
And connection to nature. I think that for me, that's an ongoing process.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I also think we think of nature as animals and so forth. Well,
hmm
nature is fire, it's
hmm
lightning,
hmm hmm
um, and it's especially a life that is much greater than oneself, and we serve it.
hmm
And I'd say that's an ongoing process for
hmm
me. And
Yeah.
you?
Um, well, what comes to mind for me are, I mean, I love going into growing up, I lived near a school where there was a little bit of wildland. So I loved that as a child. But what comes to mind for me is being out west and encountering something really other with a force of its own, like a mountain, for example, where because it's like being in a relationship where for a while it's sort of a casual relationship, everything's great, everything's friendly, and then you hit something which is, well, this person is not me, and they have a different opinion about something. It's sort of that way with a mountain. A mountain is like you have to deal with it. It can't be. You just it lays down some terms, and you have to relate to them in some way. Or fires in Yosemite when I've been lucky enough to be working in Yosemite in the summer, seeing a fire far off and just it gets bigger every day and it's this unstoppable force just doing its thing. So so for that, for me, is like the beginning of relationship for me, I guess, to actually
Yes,
see something above and beyond myself, more than just the pretty picture I have of the forest. It's like, wow, this is a serious other thing
yes.
element, you know.
I would clarify a separation here. Now, I spent months hiking around New Zealand at a certain point, and I do remember coming down from a mountain and really feeling nature as an entity, as a being, and
Mm,
pulsing with this awesome, kind of life. There's that. And then there is just, well, I think, having uh, a way to connect to the natural world, but also just dreams,
mm-hmm,
I think that is one way that I do connect with nature, is having these dreams,
mm-hmm.
and the world of imagination. I think the world of imagination and nature are connected, shall we say, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be like stuck in that literal kind of way of thinking that like the only way to connect is you got to fly on a plane to the Brazilian rainforest and
Right.
then you're
Yes.
there, you know. I mean, I remember seeing the Andromeda Galaxy in Yosemite, which is you can see it's a 2.5 million light years away. It's the furthest thing you can see. And the stars in Yosemite National Park are, of course, amazing. But then I got home and I can see it from my backyard too.
Yes.
Like not
Yeah.
quite as well, but there I am coming home from my job last year from the food co-op at midnight, and I look up and here in a city of whatever 20,000 people, there it is.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's not always a yeah, we don't have to, it's a frame of mind. It's a consciousness shift as much as it is a real direct connection, I guess,
Yes.
physically.
And, I think we all feel this tremendous loss of trees, shall we say. You mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
the Amazon and so forth. To plant a tree and to nurture that, to grow several trees. We're not helpless, here. It's a great thing to plant a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, and that connects you to nature. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
be one way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so she's there and her hands grow back. We have growing,
Yes.
healing through growth, which is great. And yeah, parts of the story I just want to hang out in. I mean, let's not leave. Let's just hang out at this hut. Everything's okay there. Do we have to keep talking about the end of the story? Well, the story is merciless in the way it goes forward, but um, the king shows up. The king wanders too. I find that
Yes.
interesting. Um,
Yes.
and it's 7 painful years for her. It's a long time for him.
Yeah.
um, it's admirable and interesting. He goes upon that journey also.
A very different journey, let's just point out, from when he went to fight wars.
Hmm.
When the message was interrupted, he's
Hmm.
out there, um, being actively defending his
Hmm.
castle and home himself. And then he switches to a helpless wandering as well. And
Hmm.
not just wandering, but feeling devastated, because let's not forget, he thinks she has been killed. Isn't
Yeah.
that right? Um, refresh my memory, Jay. Does the mother tell him that she's still alive, or
Yes,
she does?
actually. Yes,
Okay.
she does. So she says kind of as a maybe as a test, I don't know why, but she says they've been killed and she shows him the the evidence, which is the eyes of a deer and the tongue of a deer. And then he breaks down and she realizes that he must have something must have gone wrong, you know, because clearly he's
Yeah.
distraught by this. And then she tells him that, no, they're not. I didn't have the heart to kill them, but they wandered off.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and so then he begins to wander in that way.
Yes.
Um,
That's very interesting, isn't it?
mm,
Uh, what that is, a total turnaround. Not, I mean, not total. He's fallen in love with this
mm-hmm,
person anyway, so he really values and cherishes who she is, and he doesn't want to live without that. Uh,
mm-hmm,
which
mm-hmm.
is totally opposite, as we said, is fighting those wars and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to hand it to this guy. 7 years wandering in the forest.
It's a long
Wow.
time. Well, and by searching and wandering in this lost way, he has that beautiful phrase, I will go as far as the sky is blue, I think is the line in the
Oh,
Grimms. I will walk as far as the sky is blue to find her. So by searching for her, he undergoes he's able later to empathize with her, I would think, because he's undergone a similar wandering. Not the same, but it's he
yes.
probably understands more of what she's been through after this process for sure, um, which any marriage
Yes.
counselor would tell you is a good move for their later relationship. I mean, they're going to be able to. He's going to get a little bit more of what she's been through because of what he's done to find her.
Well, and if we want to go back to the loss,
Mm-hmm.
when we experience great loss in our lives, it does take so much time. Even if, suppose, your home was burnt by the fires or destroyed by the hurricanes, it feels like 7 years to rebuild that home.
Mm-hmm.
And or cancer, the treatments and so forth. Your whole body has changed, divorce, all of this takes time to get back to that place where you feel whole again, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I don't
yeah.
want it to take time. I want it to be over fast. 7 years
Yes.
is too long, and that's the feeling in those situations, right? It's excruciating. You're like, let's move on. It's done. But sometimes you can't. Things move of their own pace in the soul, in the world, in the story. They have
Yeah.
to take the time they take.
Right. I think too, at least for myself, sometimes I've had these amazing dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And then begins the hard work of uh, bringing that dream into the world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not done overnight, that takes a lifetime.
Yeah.
And you can't forget the dream and what it stood for.
Mm-hmm.
But then begins this process, and you don't even know how will I manifest this,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been given to me. And so then it's years to integrate that into the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes,
Yeah.
it's not always true in this particular story. It does. Other fairy tales, bang, it happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I certainly relate to that long period of,
Yeah.
you know not knowing where you're going, well, wanting to find something, and it's right, but
Mm.
I don't know. It's far away.
Yeah. 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 So her hands grow back, and the king arrives,
Yes.
um, and then we get the child. I love how the child is sort of the little occasion for their coming together. The child sees the king, and the king has the handkerchief on his head. He's snoring, and this playful
Well, and
child.
whoa, 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 Jay. Let's go with the handkerchief. What the heck's with that?
I don't know what's up with the handkerchief. Yeah.
Because at least in my story,
Mhm.
the mother says to the child, "Put a handkerchief over."
Mhm.
He's already asleep in the hut when they come in, right?
Yeah.
And she has this veil put
Mhm.
between them.
Mhm.
What do you think of that?
The mother the angel does that, right? Or
Oh,
the
okay, the angel.
Well, no,
Yes.
I'm asking you because is it the
I think in my version it was actually the mother, but it could be, as we all know, there's several versions of this, but they all have the handkerchief that I've read.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. The handkerchief is there. Um, yeah. So why is there it's a veil between them, right? He's
yes.
asleep. So it's like I guess who puts it there is kind of important, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they're not it's not instantly like hey, here I am, everything's awesome, perhaps. Is that what it's
Right.
saying?
Yes, and let's not forget he's asleep too. He didn't just walk into the hut with them going about their business.
Mm-hmm.
He's exhausted.
Yeah.
He falls asleep,
Mm-hmm.
and then, well, in when you told this story, who put the handkerchief on there?
Well, when I told it, I had the king put it on himself as he
Oh,
slept
okay.
because he arrived late and the morning light was going to wake him up,
Oh, okay.
people. So he puts it there and then he's kind of snoring in the morning and the child sees it and sees it fall off his face and puts it back
Yes.
on. That's been in most versions I've read where the handkerchief's on
Okay.
him and comes off and then the
Okay.
child playfully puts it back.
Oh, and now in my story, the child's name is Sorrowful or Sorrow. Is that uh
Ah, gosh, you're sending me to the books in the best way. Um,
we don't have to do that. That's
that's
okay.
okay. No,
Yeah.
I, I've definitely read versions with that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Where the child's name
Okay.
is sorrowful. That seems so sad, though. This is the storyteller confessing, right? You're getting
Yeah.
when I'm telling a story, it's yeah, you're getting some of me too. I'm sorry. It's just,
Well, yeah. Well, anyway, that was just a little that the child's name to me isn't as important as and or how it gets there, but there was this handkerchief over his
yeah.
face and he's sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he doesn't really know that he has found what he's searching for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that feeling takes place for many of us as we're, say, creating or finding this deeper connection. At first, it's happening, and we're not even aware
Mm-hmm.
that we're really writing poetry. If we had
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that before, and the muse and so forth are really, it's just part of our lives now,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of clueless about that. There
Mm-hmm.
can be that kind of feeling, um,
It's like
but
he's
something,
okay.
yeah,
It's like he's there and his problems are solved, but he doesn't know it yet. He has to. It hasn't quite dawned on him. I guess is the moment you're thinking of, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in that, these things that take so long to actually, as we're building a new home or as we're building our health again or our lives
Mm-hmm.
again after a terrible divorce, and we're just on and on and on, we don't realize at a certain point that the house is built. You've
Mm-hmm.
actually moved in and you're living there,
Mm-hmm.
or you moved into a new life that is no longer part of your marriage and
Mm-hmm.
it's really solid. you know
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
do think that it's often not a sudden thing, and I think we can even look at the handkerchief like that it's we forget what we were started out doing. Even it becomes
Mm-hmm.
so much our lives.
Yeah.
Maybe we could say that about it. I think too in the story it's off. It can be that somebody else has to lift the veil,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the child or the woman from from the sleeping king. And I think that's an interesting feeling because sometimes it takes somebody else to reflect back where we are, that
Mm.
we actually have um, accomplished what we were hoping to do, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
7 years
that's,
is a long time. Like he's really in that wandering mindset and kind of needs, I'm sure I've felt like that at times. You're in one mindset and then you're there and it's like you can relax now, actually. It's okay.
right.
Um,
And let's not forget, she has changed. She
hmm
has her hands.
Yeah.
And she does, he maybe wouldn't have recognized her because she isn't the silver handless maiden
hmm
anymore. So somehow the handkerchief is also about that.
hmm
Maybe we can't look at things directly when there's been a huge change. I mean, it is what he's been searching for, but it looks a little bit different.
hmm
I don't know. I find that handkerchief rather fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's important, you know. So, they reunite and they return. And
Hmm.
then is everything all right, Elaine? Is everything just great?
I think I feel safe about saying yes.
Wow. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I get almost this sense of dread talking about this story. I guess because we've all been through troubles in our lives, right? And you've brought them in. I've tried to bring them into this story, and I've been lucky recently not to have those troubles, I guess. But
Yeah.
as you said, the divorce, the cancer, the forest fire, those come to us when we do have troubles, and so I'm reminded. I'm hearing this story, and I'm like, ah, yes, right. There are those difficulties which come, those those
Yeah.
disasters, those crises, and maybe as a parent too, I like to think it's all we got it under control. I mean, the house is a mess a little bit, but hey, we're all okay. But in this story, the blow comes from outside, and it's done to you, despite what you or without any regard to who you are as a person or what you've
Yes.
done. Um, and it takes her a long time. That's not just the 7 years, but the wandering and everything to heal, and be whole again. Um,
But I think we are all, in a certain way, wandering, trying to find that natural connection to the greater world
mm-hmm,
and to ourselves, our greater selves.
mm-hmm.
And so it's a beautiful story as one way to journey through all of that.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that connection between being in the natural world and the self-healing, the healing of the hands, which I
Yes.
hadn't quite wrapped my head around before, but that those
Yeah.
two things are connected. If we want to heal, we need to go to a place. If we want to grow, we need to go to a place where things grow, perhaps, whether that's in our own lives or in actual fact
Hmm.
in the world. Yeah. Wow. Any other thoughts about?
No, I just think that it's just wonderful to think about how one person's journey to that greater life
Mhm,
happened,
mhm,
despite or maybe because of loss,
mhm.
great loss
Yeah.
and healing. And it's an inspiring fairy tale to me.
Hmm. Yeah. It it shows us what is possible, I guess, um, when those big blows come. So I thought I'd read some of the German because I have some of the German here, just to take us back to the original. And of course, I should remind myself and us that it's a story told around the world, which kind of astounds me. As I said earlier on, I steered clear of it. I was like, oh, it's such a brutal God. I don't want to go to that story, but it's clearly been meaningful to many people. I mean, it is to me now, but people have a fairy tale like this is remembered and repeated by human beings for good reasons, because
Yes.
it teaches us things. It reminds us of things we need to know, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Um, well, okay, I'm just going to read like three sentences just because,
Great.
if that's okay. Um, ein Müller war nach und nach in Armut geraten und hatte nichts mehr als seine Mühle und einen großen Apfelbaum dahinter. Einmal war er in den Wald gegangen, Holz zu holen. Da trat ein alter Mann zu ihm, den er noch niemals gesehen hatte, und sprach: Was quälst du dich mit Holzhacken? Ich will dich reich machen, wenn du mir versprichst, was hinter deiner Mühle steht. The devil comes, right, and says, I'll give you. Why do you need to mess around with carrying the wood? Holz is wood, so Holzhacken to hack up the wood. I will make you
Mm.
reich. Wenn du mir versprichst, was hinter deiner Mühle steht, when you give me what is behind your mill. If I've
Yes.
gotten my details right, this was told by a 24-year-old woman to the Grimms in the castle, I think it was.
Mm.
You could, and it's just astonishing to think of a story like this coming out of the mouth of someone of that age at that
Yes.
time, and then to be able to speak to us here now, and to be
Yeah.
alive. And that story had a long journey before her, I'm sure, as well, you know. Yeah. Thank you so much for exploring this with me, Elaine.
Yes,
Yeah, may we all drink from the well in the forest there,
right.
where healing happens, and learn from these stories. So, thank you so much, and let's talk again.
Blessings. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you for listening to this podcast. That was my discussion with Elaine Stanton about the Handless Maiden. Thanks to the Patreon supporters out there who've been able to support this podcast. If you're able to join them, please do so. You can do so via my website or on Patreon. That really helps make this stuff happen and these explorations of story, the stories we need in our bones and in the ground around us to nourish us. Thanks very much for listening, and take care.